Welcome, everyone, to today's tour of the temple with Joey Williams. We're very pleased to have Joey with us today. Joey Williams is the Mission Center president for the Western Europe Mission Center and the Eurasia Mission Center, where he has served since 2014. He was a committee member for the current hymnal, Community of Christ Sings, and has served the church in a variety of roles, including youth minister for the Central Mission Center in Independence from 1998 to 2002, and for Europe from 2002 to 2007, and as a translator in the International Resources Department from 2007 to 2014. Joey is passionate about justice and peace and believes music and the arts are at the heart of how we begin to reimagine the world in which we live. When the pandemic began, he jumped into a social media project called Temple Tuesdays, posting a video each week exploring what it means to be a people of the temple and to live out the ministries of the temple in our local contexts. So with no further ado, I am going to turn the presentation over to Joey.
Well, hello, everyone. It is so good to be with you today. As you can see, I'm in Independence, Missouri, and it is a beautiful day, but I want to start with just this image to get us kind of inspired about what we will be seeing today. We've got beautiful blue skies, hardly a cloud in the sky. And we are here in front of the Community of Christ Temple here in Independence. But I've come to this corner, this spot that I'm at, for a specific reason, because we're actually between two really important buildings for Community of Christ. And I hope you recognize this building as well. This is the Community of Christ Auditorium. Now, the construction for the auditorium started in the 1920s, but it was a very slow process. It took almost 30 years to really finish this building because of the Great Depression and because, of course, the church was out of money, as many, many businesses were during that time, trying to rebuild, especially through two major wars. And after that period, we finally were able to get this constructed. And this is an important site that many, many important people have come to speak in. One of those people was Harry Truman, who in 1945 announced that the United States would become a part of the United Nations Charter. And so it was announced from this spot here in the auditorium. And that was just an important moment, and I think connects well with the mission of peace that we have in Community of Christ. But the corner that I'm at is actually also a very contentious corner. We have different denominations, all related to the restoration, that are right around this spot. We have the Mormon Visitor Center right around here. We have the Temple Lot Church of Christ that is here on this corner. And actually, if you can see right here on the corner, there is a little stone that says Temple Lot. And that is the supposed place where Joseph Smith would have come with some friends, other leaders of the church, and would have announced that it was in this space that a temple should be built. And he said, in the city of Zion. And if you've been Community of Christ for a long time, you know that that word Zion is a really important word for us. In the Doctrine and Covenants, we find the word Zion referred to as an actual city, as a place, only a few times. Because most of the time in Doctrine and Covenants, we actually hear this phrase, the cause of Zion. And I think that's really important for us to make that distinction, because there was a time when, of course, people were encouraged to come and build their lives in Independence, Missouri as the city of Zion, but it actually has grown out into this idea that Zion is a cause, and Zion is found wherever we are. In fact, there was a president of the church that visited French Polynesia for the first time and gets out of the boat and gets onto the sand and sees all of this beauty of another culture and says, Zion is here. Zion is now in this place. And so for us, Zion happens wherever we are. And that connection with the temple is really important, because the temple is not just a building, but we'll see as we go through today that the temple is also something that is found in us and wherever we are living out the ministries of the temple throughout the world. As I'm walking up here, you probably immediately begin to see the different flags. And there are 50 flags representing the more than 50 nations where Community of Christ has a presence throughout the world. And there's this whole entryway is really important when we think about all of the different people and diversity we have in Community of Christ and the different nations where we are represented. You may have also noticed these planters, and there are planters all over the temple grounds. And these actually have been maintained by a group called Harmony. And Harmony is an advocacy group for the LGBTQI2S plus community. And if you want more information on them, you can go to harmony.lgbt. But since 2009, they have been maintaining the different planters that are here. Where I'm taking you now is up to the rooftop of the temple. And one of the things that I love is this huge wheelchair access ramp that we have here. And I think this is a beautiful symbol of what it means to have access to the temple. As you may be aware, our temple is open. Not right now, it's closed because of COVID, but normally it would be open for anyone to come in and visit it. And there are very few places that people could not go. People could not go to our archives without having special permission. And there are just a few closed spaces, but anyone can access the temple sanctuary. In fact, we have often all sorts of events and worships that many people are invited to come in and be a part of. Now, right after those flags, we come to a series of ginkgo trees. And the ginkgo tree is a symbolic tree of hope, of survival even. It was in Hiroshima that 6 ginkgo trees survived the atomic bombs. And we know that they survived, not only did they survive, but without mutations. And so that's quite symbolic here. And of course, because Harry Truman is from Independence, Missouri, we have a connection with Harry Truman, but also with that devastation that happened in the war and with the atomic bombs. And so there are 50 ginkgos that have been planted here in kind of this valley of the ginkgo trees. And I just think it's a gorgeous representation of not only the more than 50 nations, because there's 50 trees that are here to represent the different nations where we have a presence, but also this symbol of hope for every nation, and that we also will stop our destructive ways that happens through war. And then, of course, as we come further, we come to the World Plaza, in which we have all of the continents of the world. And if you've ever come to a world conference here, you've probably been a part of some type of ceremony that happens out here where people begin to gather in the different places that represent where they're from. And it's a pretty moving sight to see all of our delegates and the different people who have come to participate in a world conference or an international youth forum to come out here and to find their place in the world. And I'll just point out one of my favorites. If you can see it down here, I don't know if you can see it, it's probably too dark, but there's one little dot that's here for French Polynesia. And it's important that it's so far away from the others because we have maybe sometimes up to 300 people who come with the delegation from French Polynesia. And that's such an important place where our church has been planted and has been rooted in Community of Christ. And so as we reach the top of the temple, and we come onto the balcony here, we move into a labyrinth. And this was intentionally placed here to remind us of the importance of spiritual practice in what we do. And Steve Beasy has been highlighting spiritual practice as part of even our decision-making process, to take the time that we need to discern God's will, and that spiritual practice may be at the heart of how we make decisions together. But this is just a beautiful space where people can come at any time and participate in the walking of this labyrinth. And if you know much about a labyrinth, you know that it's not meant to confuse us. It's not a maze where we're supposed to get confused, although it seems like you might get confused. But if you faithfully continue forward, you always arrive at the center. And it's a beautiful symbol that we have here outside of the temple, because that's actually what the inside of the temple is like too. It is this journey that goes in to the center, where we have an encounter that then leads us out in mission. And so even if the temple doors are locked and people can't have access to that, they can have that same type of experience here up on this outside patio that's on the second level here at the temple. Now, this is one of the neat little spaces, because these windows here, you actually cannot see them from inside the building itself. But on them, you will find symbols of wheat and of rice. And that is to symbolize the coming together of the East and the West, that the entire world comes together in our pursuit of peace. And then I brought you this way because I wanted to be able to show you this huge, beautiful metal cross that actually is what you see as you drive up to the temple from Peace Drive, which is right out here. There's Temple Way, and then there's Peace Drive that drives you all the way up to the east entry. So as you are going up that drive and you're approaching the entrance, the east entrance, you see this big, huge, beautiful cross that's made out of metal. And I was asking if you could recognize what it is that's found in the center of that cross. It looks like a dove, but it's actually 3 olive branches in the shape of a dove. And so it's almost this triple symbolism. So there's the peace of Christ that we see just with the cross. And then we see, first of all, a dove. But when we look closer, it's actually an olive branch, 3 different olive branches that come together to form that dove, to really put an emphasis, a huge emphasis, on our pursuit of peace. Peace in the form of the dove, peace by extending the olive branch, and of course, the peace of Jesus Christ, which is what we pursue in our mission. Before we go inside is this different stone. And this was picked out intentionally. As you can see, it kind of sparkles. It has all of these different colors. And in some ways, this was chosen to reflect the stucco that you find on the Kirtland Temple. And so there's a connection just there with even the choice of the stone that was picked out to go along with that shiny stone when people were putting their different belongings to make the stucco of the Kirtland Temple. And before we go in, we'll take a look at this, which I think so many people have come to the temple over and over again and probably have not even seen this. It's just right outside of the entryway. But it's the dedication sign of the temple, dedicated to the pursuit of peace on April 17th, 1994, which was the opening of the temple. And it's just an important reminder that from the very beginning, this entire temple is dedicated to our pursuit of peace. And just like I showed you on that cross, that there are different levels of that peace. There's the peace of Jesus Christ. There's the peace we extend through the olive branch. And then, of course, there's the peace that we find in the Spirit through the dove. Now, even the handles, almost everything in the temple were placed on the temple with significance and meaning. And you see these handles that have a dove on them to represent peace, but also they are created very, very long. And so people of all heights would be able to access the doors here, but also intentionally designed that they get smaller. It gets narrower as you go down. So even a very small child can come up and grab this and is able to have access to enter into the temple. But of course, not everyone has to use the doors. It's ADA accessible. Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Thought my card wasn't going to work. And as we enter into the temple, we're immediately reminded again that this is not just one nation, but that we are established in more than 50 nations. We probably have a presence in over 60 some nations throughout the world, and that this is an international organization dedicated to the pursuit of peace. Another thing that impresses me here is that as we come in, we immediately have access to the sanctuary just from walking in. And that for me is important because it's not like we have to jump through a lot of hoops to get right to our events, to get right to our worship. But we're actually going to come back to that, and that will be the last thing that we go up. You're going to have to jump through all my hoops to get into the temple sanctuary today. So here, right opposite of the sanctuary entrance, we have this beautiful wooden version of the cross with the exact same symbolism on it as we saw outside. Now, the difference of this cross is that it is made up of over 100 different types of wood that actually come from all 6 continents where Community of Christ is established. And then, of course, once again, we have up here that symbolism of the dove, but it's not actually a dove. It's actually 3 wooden olive branches that form that dove and that make up this beautiful wooden cross. We have an information desk and a welcome center, and I just love that it's open here, and it's a part of our hospitality and the way that we not only want to think about how do we welcome people, but how do we help include people in all of the activities that are going on. We're now entering the meditation chapel. And this is just a beautiful, small, intimate space. As you can see, there's maybe room in here for anywhere from 30 to 40 people comfortably. But it's a very small space. Lots of different things happen in here. The Community of Christ Seminary will often hold some of its spiritual practices in here, some of its services in here. I've seen people who have been confirmed or ordained in this space. It's not necessarily set up for that normally, but it's certainly a space that can be used for that. It has a piano because, of course, singing, and you can see all the Community of Christ Sings hymn books all over are very important to us. And then it gives a view of an enclosed Japanese garden. And the architect of the temple was Japanese, but also, as I told you, we have this big connection. In fact, Independence's sister city is Higashimuriyama, which is just outside of Tokyo. And so our connection, that Japanese culture, is a big connection for us. But also, the garden, I think, is a great reminder of some of the pruning that sometimes has to happen for peace. That if we want to maintain this world or even construct the world in a place of beauty and peace, that it takes some work. And people come here weekly to maintain this Japanese garden and to do some of the ikebana that I'll show you hopefully later, if that's in there. Another beautiful aspect of this space is that it's completely enclosed, but there's actually access from the president of the Council of 12. And right across, we have Steve Veazey's office, so he can look out and use this as a meditation spot. And it just goes around some of the administrative offices here at the temple. Does anyone know what the three main purposes of the temple are?
Education?
Yes, education. So our seminary often meets here. We have a library here. We have archives here. What else? Of course, we have a sanctuary, so we gather here for
Worship?
yes, worship. Wonderful. And then I just said we have our administrative offices here, so it's also it's our international headquarters. It's a space that we gather to make decisions. We have our, conferences are held across the street, and that's all part of the temple complex. And so the purpose of the temple has three purposes: education, worship, and to serve as an international headquarters, a space where we make decisions for the mission of the church. And I think that's really important because it connects us also to our Kirtland temple, which had the exact same three purposes as their main functions. Now, one of the beautiful parts of this room is the different Garnier paintings that we have in here. And when Mr. Garnier was working on these paintings, he actually often called in Wally B, who has a good eye and is good with colors and design. And then he also asked Paul Edwards, who was known as kind of a historian of the church, to have some of input on these. And Paul said he knew nothing about art, but was happy to add some of his input as well to these different paintings. So these, of course, are the 8 sacraments of Community of Christ. I assume you've all had a chance to look at these, or you have a copy of them even in your own congregation, perhaps.
Joey,
yeah.
the artist is Canadian, was Canadian. He's not living now. And he was from Windsor, Ontario. His name is Jack Garnier. That's how you say his last name.
Thank you. I speak so much French that I immediately go to a French. I do that all the time and call it Garnier, when that's not his name. So we're now going to go to some of the more administrative spaces. And we just saw the Japanese garden from inside the meditation chapel, but also as you walk into the administrative offices, we have a good view. There's a room back here called the Peacemakers Room, and there's nothing that special about it, except there's all sorts of words of welcome and peace that are on the wall back here, but it's often a space that we use for our international gatherings that different delegations will meet in. And then I wanted to show you another important space like that called the Continence Room. And if you were to come here before World Conference as a delegate and maybe participate in the International Leaders Meetings, or the ILM, this is another big space that we have with translation booths all at the back. It's currently set up for some meetings with the First Presidency, as well as some videos that they've been preparing, but it's a great space for people to come together. And it's called the Continence Room, with different continents, Australia and Asia, at the different doors to represent that room. There's a kitchen area in the temple, and seminary uses this a lot. One of the great things that Tony and Charmaine do for their classes is they will come up and prepare meals that then the seminary students will share together out here in the temple lunchroom. I'll just show this beautiful water fountain. Nothing too special about it, except that it has a sensory activation, which is kind of fun. And so it's a green water fountain that gets you quick, clean water. These offices are fiscal services. This used to be my office. This used to be where international department of Community of Christ was housed. So you had a lot of the apostolic assistants, and you also had people that were working in finances for the international church that were housed in here. But this has recently changed to the fiscal services. And then just down the hall, we have an entryway into the Community of Christ Library, which is actually part of the public library system here in the United States. So anyone with a public library card for Mid-Continent Public Library would be able to check out books and use this library. People come in all the time and use it for internet. People try to use the internet to apply for jobs and all different resources that they can use in the library. It's also where we have the offices of our director of seminary, Zach McLaughlin, and also Professor Tony Schwala-Smith has his offices there. Hopefully I didn't lose you in the stairwell, but now we're heading to the upper level of the administrative offices. And the first one we come to is the Council of 12 Apostles. So of course there are actually many different offices in here, but I'm going to take you to one special office. You might recognize some of these names: Catherine Mombwe, Carlos Enrique Mejia, Mareva, Barb Carter, Janae, Bunda Chibwe, and right at the very end, does this one look familiar? And Art gave me permission to walk inside, but he's obviously had quite an interesting different group of fields. And so he's got artwork from all over different places where he has served the church. I love this sign. Many, many different things. You may have noticed this, but it was right across the street. It's right across the street, the stone church, from the auditorium. It's across that big piece of grass. And then I'll bring you over to this section, which on this wall, you're going to see quite an evolution of some of our Council of 12 configurations. There's a big change that happens somewhere between here and here, as you see the ways that Community of Christ has continued to grow and develop. And then here we have some of the main pictures of our current Council of 12 members, with David Nii and Catherine Mombwe being our most recent members of the Council of 12.
I was so impressed that there's a public library in the temple. Was that true right from the beginning, or is that more recent?
Yeah, the library was here since they built the temple. It was one of the initial functions that they decided to have here. Of course, part of that is the archives, and we have a pretty extensive archive section that's in the very back of the library, but that's always been a part of it.
Very nice.
So of course there's many other offices that are in here, and that was probably the last office we'll actually go into. But we have membership records. So of course, all the information that people are entering into Shelby, all of the life events that are happening for Community of Christ are recorded at the different international levels, but then also here at World Headquarters. And then we have the council room, which is a beautiful spot. I'm not sure how functional it actually is to have a conversation this far apart, but I have seen several meetings that have taken place in here, and potentially it might be more symbolic than it is functional. In the middle, we have the peace logo. And so at the middle of the conversation, whatever conversation happens in here, we are to be reminded that we are headed towards a vision of peace, that all of our conversations need to lead to peace. And then I love this stained glass window of the dove, because it's often the spirit that we pass through, or the spirit that pushes us out into the world. And it reminds us even that all of our important conversations that will be had around this table have to have a place back out in the world, and that the spirit carries us into that space. And then another symbolic function of this room is that it has 7, and you don't find many 7-sided tables. And at each of the sides are 3 chairs. And if you go through the World Church Leadership Council, so you take the heads of all of the quorums, so if you take the 3 presiding bishops, and if you take the first presidency, and if you count the Council of 12, and you have the high priest quorum president, as well as the president of the presidents of 70, you add all of those different persons up together, that there would be a seat for all of the leading quorums and the leaders of the church that would gather to make decisions. So often when we gather, we actually have more than just that amount of people. I think the World Church Leadership Council is even up to maybe 23 or 24 people. So I'm not sure if that is the best room for us anymore, but it has a very symbolic character in it. And then we come to the first presidency suite, which we have our secretaries that would be here at the beginning, the first presidency's assistants. And then back in the back would be President Cram, Stacey Cram's office, President Scott Murphy's office, and of course, President Stephen M. Beasley's office. But what I love about this office is that as they come out the door, they are confronted every day as they're coming in and out of their offices of basically the purpose of the temple. They're reminded of our vision of peace that we find in the logo that represents the scripture that we find in Isaiah. And they're reminded the temple shall be dedicated to the pursuit of peace. It shall be for reconciliation and for the healing of the spirit. And I just think having that there, I don't know if they're even aware of it when they walk in and out, but to be constantly reminded of what the vision is through the logo for the church, but also the purpose of the temple, and that they're located in this space. And then just down the hall, we have the office of the presiding evangelist, who of course at this time is Jane Gardner. And she used to work at the end of this hall, and I'll get there later, but Jane is our current presiding evangelist. And at least in my ministry in Europe, the work of the evangelist is such an important ministry for all of the things that we're doing. It's just amazing the way the evangelists have gathered and been able to provide a ministry that not only sustains the church, but especially for our new seekers, people are just finding it amazing to have someone who will accompany them and walk with them for 6 months to a year to prepare their evangelist blessing, or even just to spend time with them to talk about some of their life direction and some of the transitions they might be going through. A lot of people are going through faith transitions. And so that ministry has become even more important. And then we have the offices of legal services, or the general counsel, and they work on all sorts of things from creating all of the contracts that we have that keep our churches going. They help maintain some of the different aspects, legal aspects of our properties, anything that needs to be carried out or have a stamp of approval on. They're working on those different things. They also work on child protection, which is another important aspect of the life of Community of Christ. Since we work with children, that we try to do our best to protect the vulnerable. And then next to that office, which as you can see is actually connected in the back to the First Presidency Suite, we have the presiding bishopric and the mission funding that we have in here. So we have someone who helps plan estate legacies. So people who might leave part of their estate to the church, but they also help them figure out what they'll do with the rest of their estate for their families. And so they do family planning and leaving a life legacy. And then of course, President Stacy Cram is also the presiding bishop at this moment. And then we have poor Steve Graffio, and I don't mean to call him little poor Steve Graffio, but he, through this pandemic, has been the person up here daily to maintain the temple and make sure that it continues to function, but also is a bishop for the rest of the world. But for a long time, he was the only person, one of the only people accessing the actual temple during this pandemic. We then have human resources. We have the Director of Human Resources, Matt Frizzell. Their missional purpose is to make sure that we can maintain the functioning of the church through employment, human resources, human resource development, and helping people be out in the field and able to live out the mission of the church. They also work, of course, on how we can have pensions for people, and that's been an important part of how we can continue to maintain people working part-time or full-time, and even volunteers. There is a lot of consideration of how do we even help sustain and support volunteers in what they do. And then the last offices that we have in this building, there are some over at the auditorium, but the last ones here is our communications department, where Jen Kilpack, as I told you, she's in charge of the communications department now. And then we have also our formation ministries. Jane Gardner used to be the person in charge of formation ministries when before she became the presiding evangelist, and it's now Apostle Janae Grover who works with formation ministries, and that's all of the resources that are created. So your reunion materials, if you've been doing the nonviolence reunion materials, that has been created by this department. All of the sermon helps and the worship helps that you access either online or you have a hard copy of, those are all produced here, and any types of resources are produced through the Formation Ministries department.
The paintings are beautiful on the walls. Do they get changed often?
So I didn't stop to see her because I didn't ask her permission, but we do have our curator of the paintings, and her name is Nicole Robison, and she is actually one of the assistants in the Council of 12, and part of her role is to make sure that all of our paintings and artwork not only are maintained and also kept in a database system, but for the changing out. And so from time to time, that will happen. Of course, it hasn't probably happened during this pandemic, really, but normally for each large event, there would be some major pieces that would be changed out. And I'll just show you a couple of those that are out here they're just beautiful. Many of these have been given to the World Church from members from throughout the world, but then others have come in different ways. Often some of the different pieces of artwork have been donated through different events. We have a Shalom place here, and what I want to point out about the Shalom place is when the temple is open and functioning, this is a space where ministers who are volunteers have these 3 different rooms where they can go and listen to people and counsel with people, and often the sacrament of laying on of hands would happen in this space. It has been, if you know Jan Craybill, who has been the principal organist for Community of Christ for years, this used to be her office, but now it's Daniel's office. And so in his new role of as kind of director of some of the different temple ministries that will be happening, he will be pursuing different ways to bring the temple alive and to bring its mission out into the community with Community of Christ. And just outside of the Shalom place is this display of all of the recipients of the International Peace Award. And then there's also the actual award that is given to people. This is what they receive. But all of the different people who have received the different peace awards, many names that you'll probably know. One of our real famous ones that a lot of people like is Jane Goodall, and I actually remember that peace colloquy. One of the things that is happening is that different peace colloquies are happening all throughout the church. So in Western Europe in 2018, we held our very first peace colloquy for Europe and gave away a peace award for the European church. I'm going to take you down the stairs, and then we are almost ready to go into the worshiper's path that will lead us up to the temple sanctuary. Do you have any questions in this little time space before we get to that?
Joey, when you were going through the council chamber there, I had heard earlier that it was never wired for communications and internet and all that stuff. Is there any plan to do that in due course?
When you said the council chamber,
the one with the 21 seats, or
yes, it now has the capability to there is internet that is in there, but to be honest, they have fixed up another room in the Council of 12 office, which is another room that actually has translations available. And that's one of the important things is that space, it just doesn't have any rooms off to the side to be able to put in a translations booth. And right now we use French and Spanish as the other languages. So we don't use that room as much. We would either use probably the Council of 12 room, which has lots of space. It's got a huge, huge long table. And then another space that is often used is the continence room that I showed you, the large, large room, but they'll block that off and have a smaller room just for the World Church Leadership Council when they gather. But of course, for the last year and 3 months, 4 months, they've been just using online resources to be able to do that. We've been very lucky that Zoom allows for some translation right now. And so some of that's been facilitated.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, this is a real exciting part, I think, of the tour and probably what many of you have been waiting for. But just even before you begin to enter the sanctuary, we are immediately brought back to a profound and important event in the early life of the church. There is this multi-layered glass, and it's several layers of etched glass that create this beautiful depiction of a wooded area. And I bet many of you would use the other term for that, which you could call it a grove area. And we're reminded that all of our encounters with God begin by searching, begin by this lack of wisdom and looking for answers. And so a young 14-year-old boy filled with questions begins to ask these questions and decides to turn and go into the woods to begin to pray, looking for that encounter and that experience. And so we pass symbolically through that experience as we all come as seekers, as we all come filled with questions and hoping to have an encounter to give us guidance and direction. And then we walk, and immediately we come to another important and profound encounter in the wider, not only Christian tradition, but that goes and is shared with all of the different traditions that use the Torah and the Bible. And we come to this burning bush. And it's a beautiful piece of artwork because it's actually done on 3 layers to see this burning bush encounter. And so we, as Moses, have an opportunity to turn to see what God might be up to. And so it's very interesting because I think it's very intentional that as we come in, if we want to have this burning bush encounter, just like Moses, who was walking by with his sheep, he could have just continued to walk by, but in order to see what God was up to, had to intentionally turn and enter into that experience. And so the worshiper's path begins with that burning desire for God to call us into activity, into God's activity for the world. And when we turn and move forward, we can begin that path, the worshiper's path. And as you come into that space, the very first thing that we are reminded of is you are welcome here. It's the parent with arms wide open, ready to receive their child who has come home. And so anyone who may have felt separated, may have felt distanced, may have felt like they weren't worthy enough, or maybe they hadn't been living in a way that they would be acceptable, this piece of artwork that you might know best as the story of the prodigal son, but I call it the expectant parent, or a parent that is awaiting with arms wide open, ready to receive as we return to God. And one of the other beautiful things about this path is that the light grows brighter as you go up it. But as the light is still a little bit dim on this side, we cross through the shadow of the cross. And it's beautifully significant because I'm not sure if our focus is supposed to be here, or maybe in both places at the same time, but it's almost as if we will be touched by God's grace, or we walk through God's grace as we continue that journey. And then the cross itself is pretty significant because, as you can see, unlike the cross outside that was this beautiful metal, huge, almost commanding cross, here we have the very rugged, the ugly cross, the very common cross. And so we are to be reminded, I think, of the realities of the suffering that happened. And yet, in our Western world, that we haven't used crosses, that's not been used for years. Sometimes I think we cannot even grasp what it's trying to emblemise here, or to show us here. Would it be different if there was a hanging noose, which is a much more recent use in our cultures of ways that people were punished to death? Or the electric chair, if there was an electric chair, or a firing squad that was standing here, would our perception be different of the feeling of grace as we walk through the shadow of the cross and continue that journey? It then comes to this beautiful piece of artwork that was done by a Muslim who did this piece of artwork. And that's very significant because this same tree of life would be a symbol for Islam, for the Jewish tradition, as well as Christianity. And this hope that there is life at the end of our journey, and that this tree of life is available for all of us who come to worship in those shared religions of the world. this is that ikebana, and that's a Japanese art form of fresh flower arrangement. And so right now, as you can see, it's had some issues because it hasn't been able to be maintained, but normally every week someone comes in and creates a new ikebana arrangement in this space. And in this artwork, it's very important that there are 3 levels that show a well-balanced arrangement of the feeling that heaven, humanity, and all of the earth are in harmony. So the heavens and the earth and humanity all are represented and combined in harmony in the different ikebana representations that we have here. And then the next to last station is the dark night of the soul. And for me, this can be one of the most powerful moments. It's that recognition of a God who sees us on our journey at our worst, and a God who is waiting to receive us and welcome us with all of our suffering, with all of our pain. Just a few weeks ago, I was able to give a personal tour to a woman who was in a wheelchair as I was pushing her around, but she had just gone through a divorce. And when we got to this station, and when we talked about a God who meets us exactly where we are in whatever we're going through in our lives, and she just wept over and over in this space. And you might see it as the same person going through 3 different iterations of their despair and pleading with God to hear their prayer. Or you might see it as different people in different places. And then I'm so sad because we've turned off the water for this beautiful, beautiful water fountain, but it almost looks like this anyway, even when there's water in it. There's just barely enough water that it seeps over the side and continues to run. And it doesn't have the best contrast here, but I'll read what's on the wall. Whoever drinks of the water that I shall give will never thirst. And of course, this is the idea that we hear over and over in our hymnody, but also in the words of Jesus, that anyone who is thirsty, come to me and I will satisfy your thirst. Come and drink of living water. It reminds me of one of the songs in Community of Christ Sings that goes, come now, you hungry, come now, you thirsty, come drink living water, come unto me. And then just like the beginning where we had to turn to go up this path, we now have another opportunity to decide, will we turn and complete our journey that will bring us into that inner circle, into that encounter with the divine? Not that the divine hasn't been on the entire journey, but in that moment of arriving to the center of our worship, where we come in together. So one of the first things we're reminded of is the intimacy of this space. Even though there's tons of seating, in this space, it's still very intimate. You feel almost as though you can just look to your right and left and see every person in the room. Everyone is very connected. And then there's also this sense of these pylons and the organ itself that begins to draw our view up. And there we see the purpose of our journey, this inward, outward spiral, this journey that works its way into the center with an encounter, with potentially guidance. Maybe it's the moment of discernment where something is affirmed or revealed to us, and then that outward journey that begins to lead us back into the world in mission. Just a beautiful organ and a beautiful space. One of the questions when the temple committee was gathering to decide how the temple would be built, what it would look like, but also what would its function be, they said, what would we do in it? You know, of course it makes sense for a world conference, but what will we do every single day? And so one of the things that was decided is that they would hold a daily prayer for peace. And so this would be the candle that typically would be lit every single day, and then a prayer given, and recognizing a different country and their needs for prayers for peace throughout the world. I think somebody mentioned that was the organ a Canadian organ builder that created the organ?
Yes, it was built by Cassavant Organs out of Montreal.
Yes. You guys are all over this place. And of course, we gather here, and the Canadian Saints paid for it. Thanks, Barb. That's great.
Actually, that's actually quite true, Joey. The tax laws here were such that in order for us to get credit for making contributions to the temple, we had to have something that would to show for it. And so they actually designated parts of the temple that were quote unquote Canadian, so that's how we could justify the contribution.
Oh, that completely makes sense. So it had to be affixed to a physical, tangible thing that you could say, this is what we purchased.
Yeah, if some auditor really wanted to go to the mat on it, they had to be able to say, yeah, here's what we bought.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, it's beautiful. Thank you for your contribution. As you can tell, it's amazing. And of course, this space, has so much that it offers. But one of the things that I think is beautiful in here is that except for decorations that we add to this building and this part of the building, outside of the organ, there's really no design, there's no decoration. So we are not given any specific images of what our encounter should be, of what our worship should be. It is left kind of as a blank slate or blank page, and we create and that experience happens without a lot of expectations. It gives a lot of direction and gives the Spirit a lot to work with, I feel, for us as a people when we gather in this space. In contrast, the auditorium is a much larger space, and I don't think we had time to go over into that auditorium chamber, but in here you get that sense of let's move up, and it's kind of almost this upward experience or almost personal, intimate experience with the divine, even though it's collectively shared with many others in this room. I think at the most you can get about 1,400 people in this area. Thanks to this type of seating, it probably comfortably only seats around 1,100, but you can probably get up to 1,400 people in here. Whereas in the auditorium chamber across the street, you can get over 5,000 people seated and much larger space. And immediately, rather than being drawn to this upward, downward, intimate experience and flow, we are reminded that we are just one in many as the circles expand wider and wider and wider in that room. And almost makes it a perfect place to have discussions of our decision-making process and how we make decisions together in that room. Because for me, that's the point. How do we go wider and wider into the far-flung rows and aisles of the voices that we need to hear from around the world, to consider all of the different perspectives that we need to hear before we make decisions together. And so that space is much more our decision-making space now, whereas this space is much more dedicated and concentrated on those intimate personal gatherings, worship experiences, or even events. We've had peace colloquies and different events here to educate and to come together to see what that vision for peace is for the world. Just a few additions that are interesting maybe to know is that there's a space back here for children. And so it's got some glass and makes that a more comfortable space sometimes for parents who are having some time with their children, or if their children are being noisy, or even if they just want a space that's apart to be back with their children, they can be back there. And then we have translations booth, and we can do up to, I believe, 11 different languages in this space. And then here we have our media and sound, all of the different things that need to happen to make sure our microphones are on, et cetera, et cetera. Behind these pylons is storage. So some of the decorations that we have are behind those two pylons there. All of our communion materials are kept back here, our serving trays, et cetera, et cetera. So people will go back there to prepare the communion plates. And over here, we have a gathering space, just a small little room where people who will be participating in the service can go in and prepare before a service for any of that. Outside of here, and we'll see that again when I come around, but there's a choir room and a location for larger groups to gather. Maybe if someone's doing a drama, they might gather in that other room outside there. And of course, there's bathrooms and other things off to the side. One of the interesting parts about this space is that there are 6 different specific exits to the room, 6 different doors that represent, again, the 6 different continents upon which Community of Christ has a presence and is established.
Why is there a way for people to walk up into that tower part way or some way? Or are those windows?
Not in general. So in general, no, there's not a way to do that. But you are correct that at this part where the windows are is a small little balcony type of area. And you can walk a certain way until that stops. And I'm not exactly sure where it stops, but at a certain point it stops, and you have to take kind of a ladder to get up to even further parts of it. But at some point it stops, and then they have these tools that go up and they can change lights out with.
Jan Graybill took a few of us up to tour the back of the organ, and that was quite fascinating. And there was a ladder in there too, but I didn't go up that part.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think if you put Community of Christ organ in YouTube, in a search in YouTube, she has 2 different videos, one of the auditorium organ and then one of the temple organ, that walks you through a lot of the description of that. And I think she takes you behind and shows you the little bitty pipes and everything. Great. I think we're doing good. I think we're right on target. We're near the end. So when people finish with a worship, there's all different ways that people go out when we're at a big event because we do it many times. But some of the symbolic way that this was prepared was we're now behind. You can see the stage here, but there's a hallway that if we were all walking out together, we would be expected to all walk up this ramp that takes us basically out. And if you've seen from outside where the huge brass doors are, each one of those doors is 16 tons in weight. And you would walk out those doors together, and everyone would then be at the top of the stairs that go down to the World Plaza. And so that was symbolic that we all move from worship out together. Before you do that, and I think this is also pretty interesting and symbolic that potentially we've been encountering Jesus the entire way on this whole journey, but we haven't seen, other than the cross, we haven't seen any depictions of Jesus. But just before we leave this space through those brass doors, we encounter a Jesus that has arms stretched open, ready to bless us as we leave this space and everyone comes out. And I'll just show you, those brass doors are 16 tons each, but it's been made very simple for even a small child to be able to push that door open. And then this is another gorgeous part because you don't see all of this color from the outside of the building, but this is an award-winning, actually, stained glass depiction of the fields are ready for harvest. And so before we leave this space, anytime we've had this encounter together, we've been in the temple together, we have this huge reminder, and at all the levels, you see all the levels that people could be coming out of, they are reminded that we have a work to do, that we have a task to do, and that there are people out in the world ready not only to hear that message, but to receive the blessings of that work that we are sent out to do in the world. And so as I come down the end, that choir room is back here. Here's a room we keep our instruments in. And as we go out for our final look of the temple, you'll go by just a little bit more artwork that's on the walls. We're now in a hallway that is often used for all types of yoga activities or different. Sometimes I play drums out here just for fun. It's a great space where we can stay cool when it's hot, but still look out on the World Plaza. Or if it's winter, we can stay warm inside here. But to do activities, sometimes people gather there for their prayer groups at different events that we have. And then finally, if we were walking together through those doors, this is where we would have ended up. We would have walked right out of these huge brass doors that have upon them the emblem of peace, the logo of Community of Christ. Can anybody tell me which scripture this logo comes from? It's in Isaiah.
The lamb and the lion shall lie down together, and a young boy will lead them.
Yes, so this is in Isaiah 11. You can go to Isaiah 11, and it starts at verse 6. But what I think people often forget is to go on to verse 9. For me, especially in this question of nonviolence that we're asking ourselves at this time in the life of the church, maybe verse 9 gives us some more information or some more ideas of what nonviolence and its place might have in our pursuit of peace and justice. Because in verse 9 it says, they shall not harm or destroy on any of any part of my mountain, on all of my mountain. They shall not harm or destroy. And so, yeah, that logo has become significant for our pursuit of peace. And then, as you can see, I'm walking away. If you were to come down those stairs, when you come out, it directs you to the very last thing I'm going to show you today, which is this sculpture of turning our swords into plowshares, to again remind us that almost the entire point of the building of this temple and the ministries of the temple that we do are to promote peace, reconciliation, healing of the spirit in all of the work that we do. And I just love this perspective of watching this person turning their swords into plowshares, and then you can see the Community of Christ logo behind it. And that's the tour of the Community of Christ Temple, a temple dedicated to the pursuit of peace.